Here we are commencing. There puts up the clickety clacks, etc., etc. Oh, the days of typewriters and telephones and all the pre-digital before the internet, and now the year 2019. Yay! Okie doke. Thank you, Peter, for this opening, and we're hoping the sound works well. And remember, there's tortucanwordpress.com, my website. And we will now stop sharing as we commence the show. As noted, it is 2019, back from the holidays. I didn't have a show last week. I put a variety of little things on the agenda. All by myself here, Jackson Wheat, who sometimes shows in on our shows and will probably be back next week, was busy with some other things, and I put some invites out, and they may or may not show as the course of events. But in the meantime, step one of the agenda is, of course, the exciting world of contested bones. Christopher Rupe and John Sanford's criticism of human evolution, which I've been constructing a source methods analysis based on a request from one of the Evolution Hour viewers who said, hey, I don't have the time to go through this stupid thing. Would you go through the stupid thing for me if I send it to you? And I go, sure. So I've been compiling a bibliography and a listing of what sources are dealt with where, and whether they categorize as general science or technical science literature, whether they're being used for authority quoting, or whether they're fairly representing their contents or misrepresenting their contents. And it's been a pretty good pattern from the get-go, which is about 40% of it is secondary citation. And shut down a little file over here. 40% of it is treated as secondary quote mining, that sort of thing. Of the 30% or so that are technical papers, about half of them qualify as misrepresenting, in the sense that they are missing information that is in there, quote mining them for very narrow bits. Yes, Abij, greetings, Australopithecus Sediba, which is the chapter that I'm dealing with at the moment. Because I'm by myself, I'll have to poke over every once in a while and take a look at the live chat to see what's going on in there. For any questions or comments or raucous sounds from the peanut gallery, however we get along with it. For those who are unaware of Australopithecus sediba, this is an interesting one of that big bunch of Australopithecines. This was discovered in the early 2000s and then described in a series of papers that includes one that I put a link to. And the main thing is that it's an interesting mixture, and which is why it's still somewhat controversial as to how close it lies to the origin of humans or not. Needless to say, nobody has classified it as in the Homo genus, so everyone acknowledges that it's an Australopithecine. But just how close is it compared to Australopithecus afarensis and the various other ones that are thought, well, we don't have enough data yet. But it's an interesting one because it's bipedal, but it's a really good tree climber. And this has led Rupe and Sanford to riff off of every little snippet that suggests that it's actually a composite of two different forms, that it's not actually a single species, and that the apey part is apish part is just an ape, and the other parts down below are from a human being, I guess, strolling around Africa. When? Since they're young Earth creationists, they don't really get into that chronology matter. It's always hide the ball on this. Yeah, Old Scratch, I agree with you. It feels like I haven't seen RJ all year. Yeah, it's been a long, long time. 2019 is just edging forward as the little sands of time drip down through all the thing. And so anyway, on this Sediba matter, I put a link to a secondary source that they kind of quote mined, one of those little ... things where they didn't want to talk about what was beyond the material about its orangutan-like features in terms of its arboreal nature. And then, of course, the technical paper, which is on some of the limbs details, which can get you more into the actual data field. And you can look in the previous linkages that I put up in the various series here with the Sediba chapter, that they basically touch on virtually all the technical literature. The question is, do they pay attention to it in full detail? So everybody can read that on their own. and get a nice sense of the thing. I put up one of the things that was fun while I was on vacation, and I put a link up to it in the comments in the description section, is I had a chat with a flat earther on Jackson Wheat's channel. And I was actually in Seattle at the time, and I was using my smartphone and wondering when my batteries would die, sitting in my niece's Montessori class on the little teeny baby chairs. And it was an interesting experience. And anyway, the flat earther in question, very devout and very certain, and very easily repeating stuff that he gets from flat earth videos, and not really researching much of anything like the history of measuring the curvature of the earth or all that space travel stuff that we've been doing. And he acknowledged several times that, well, maybe he should have been better prepared for the discussion, as in doing research. And I would suggest he should start researching. That's something that he hasn't actually done. Hi, Strike. Yeah, I gave you a link too. If you want to pop into the room, that's fine. Yes, you've had to go weeks without. Although I was able to make Strike's movie nights periodically, again using my little smartphone thing, as long as the battery would go. I was told by some smartass in the room that yes, you can get these little auxiliary battery packs nowadays. And I suppose one of these days, if I can scrape up a thing, I'll probably have to do that if I'm before next holiday, because I kind of like to wean off of the internet and stuff while I'm over on the holidays with people. It's like real life, you know, these things we do. Anyway, it was a fun discussion, and you can take a look at that little puppy, the debate with the flat earther. He was quite sincere and polite and sweet. And his buddy was popping in every once in a while to make little snarky comments. But it was painfully obvious that he never had bothered to study anything about how we figured out how the Earth is located, and that the big ball of fire in the sky is really, really big and quite far away, not maybe, what, 5 miles away and 30 miles across, which I think was some numbers that one flat earther has been put off. I can't remember whether he did this on that or not. And it's weird. And to think that somebody in the late 2018, and there are flat earthers I've been jousting with just this morning in 2019, Hercules on Twitter, that there are people who think that today, in the world we have and the knowledge that we have, even as we're about ready to be seeing the information coming in from the new asteroid that they've planetesimal that they found out there, the one that looks like a lumpy snowman, Ultima Thule. What was funny, I haven't planned to talk about this, but I suppose I should, is how many people don't know the origin of the Ultima Thule thing. This actually brings to mind pseudoscience and Hollow Earth and Hans Horbiger and Nazi pseudoscience. There's a whole long weird tradition of that term popping up in this kind of super civilization of Nordic supermen that lived up in the Arctic sometime before the pesky non-Aryans mucked everything up. You know, this is a weird provenance to it. And I think Ultima Thule gets mentioned a bit if you've ever read Martin Gardner's old Fads and Fallacies in the Name of Science. I think he mentioned some of that stuff there. And so it's worth the search. And so somebody had a snarky sense of humor when they decided to call this little blob the Ultima Thule thing, probably because it's really far out there. It's in the Kuiper belt. We'll see if I live long enough where we'll have actual probes and telescopic evidence on the Oort cloud, and you'll see or hear the giant sound of goalposts moving, as masses of creationists who've been insisting the Oort cloud is fictional will have to eat their whatever it is they feel like eating. But anyway, that's something we'll see for the rest of the 21st century, assuming we have a 21st century and a space program and an economy and any of the other fun things we go on. Anyway, so I put a link in on that. And of course, I'm still putting in my link to my debate with Kent Hovind. We're up over a couple thousand views, but we would like to have tens of thousands of people see me slice, dice, and fillet Kent Hovind, because I was quite pleased with how that worked out. And I'm not anticipating ever being able to debate with him again. I doubt I'll ever catch him in the same venue as I do. So we'll find out about that one. But hope springs eternal. We'll see what happens in 2019 and so forth. What I have on most of the links. Actually, it was a side issue. As I do research for my TIP project, and I find creationist literature, and then they make mention of technical literature, so I track down the technical literature. And sometimes I'll be hitting a topic that I hadn't seen before, or it's a very new one. And this is one that was actually linked to, I think, by a Twitter creationist. So I stumbled onto it, and it's about plant pigments, these bilirubins, which are normally thought to have only occurred in animals. And so, ta-da, finds out that they're also found in bird of paradise and maybe a few other plants as well. And ta-da, this means creation. See how obvious that is? No. As it turns out, in researching bilirubins and the whole structure of where those little molecules come from and how they're related to other molecules that are in the heme pathway, and how that actually therefore is related to the deep roots of hemoglobin systems in the vertebrates, and why you wouldn't be at all surprised that over the course of hundreds of millions of years, a little teeny mutation might turn some of the features that led to the bilirubins in animals to a similar thing in an occasional plant. There's a bunch of technical literature then that I put in on that about that whole system. So actually, I learned a lot more interesting stuff and connected up some more dots that way, which of course you aren't getting in that Catchpool Creationist paper that I put a link up onto. Let's see what's going on over in there. Beej and Old Scratch and Brian are having a chat, and I'm not sure exactly what about parabolic dental cavern. Wow, somebody been to the dentist? Anyway, losing my audience here. So anyway, you can follow up on all of that aspect. I think it's a lot of really interesting technical literature. And I also will be showing a slightly revised patron listing, because I realized that there are actually levels of patronage, and I've been going in reconfiguring everything, and hopefully will start actually receiving the patron money. Thank you, thank you, thank you. In 2019, now that I got some menu resets. Pelagia was prodding me on it, and so I have done some of that. So we'll find out what all is that going. Yes, we've got parabolic or non-parabolic dental arcades. That would relate to the shape of the hominid jaw and the origin of the way our thing. We're relatively boring as mammals go. We've got a fairly straightforward curve thing if you've seen a skull straight down, or you could dismember your jaw and take a look at it that way, but I don't recommend doing that. The variation that you find among mammals in terms of jaw shape is quite varied, although they're all the same bones. They got fixed in the dim and distant therapsid side of reptile-mammal transition evolution when the dentary bone expanded and became the jawbone, which mammals are unique in that respect. But how those things curve and alter. Puffalophagus asked James Downer, what happened to your debate with Standing for Truth tonight? I wasn't aware I was having a debate with Standing for... Oh, maybe, I guess so. But hold a second. Let me go get my phone and find out. Yipes, maybe I did have something planned. Hold a minute. Oops. Let me see. Let's see. Whee! Thank you. Let me look on my damn calendar. It's been a blur since I got back from the holidays. No, actually, it's listed in my calendar as Jackson is debating. Jackson is the one who's going to be debating Standing for Truth, and it's tomorrow on the 3rd. Boy, shoot, you kids, you just gave me a shock. I thought, what? Wait a minute. So that's scheduled for 7 to 8 p.m. Ish my time, which is Pacific. So it would be 9 o'clock out in the wilds of Louisiana. And what time zone? I can't remember what SFT has. So that's for tomorrow. Thank you for prodding my memory on that and keeping me from having a complete panic attack about the idea that I had a debate schedule. That has happened occasionally where I've had debates that are coordinated to where I had to get off of my channel here to make sure that I was in preparation to be able to deal with it. But phew, tomorrow. And I'm just there as an innocent bystander. Little bystander. I expect him to be trotting out the same stuff, genetic entropy and that kind of thing. He's fairly conventional in repeating material from his sources and not showing any tendency to source fact check them. Sanford's genetic entropy book, which Jackson Weed and I are going to have a nice little section on that in the new Rocks Are Still There book, which had he been here, we'd be discussing a little more of that. Let's see what's all going on there. Hi, Richard. There we go. More people. Long time no see. Yes, yes. No one's seen me since last year. And I know that the debate that Kent Hovind was supposed to have with, I guess, a theistic evolutionist on Modern Day Hysteria's channel went nowhere last night. He couldn't seem to get his feed organized. Apparently, he was running it on some new platform and did not think to check to see that it worked beforehand. That's bad dog stuff. Whenever when I've been doing debates or discussions, I've always wanted to get on really early and make sure that everything is running and I'm connected up properly and everything else is running properly, because you owe it to the audience to do that. You know, you don't set up a thing and then have people twiddling their thumbs for an hour and then we discover that nothing has happened. So anyway, I figure if I schlub in Spokane who can barely figure out how to pull off my YouTube channel and technically I still need to have some help to figure out how to put the links of my video things over in a menu that people would see if they call up the channel, because it sees when I call it up because there's no content there. And I go, no, I've had content, but it isn't showing up there. And I'm afraid to just move things around willy-nilly because I'm afraid that I might be screwing something up or disabling things. I got a few videos that I did when my email address, the computer got juggled up and forgot which thing I was logged in at. And so there's a few of them aren't in the same cluster as everyone else. And I know there's ways you can copy it over and then reformat it. And a lot of things that have to be done. So I apologize as an old fart from the 20th century who is amazed that I can be doing any of this stuff at all, that I have not yet got all the little foibles worked out in how YouTube is going. So I do keep track, however, in my own thing of all of the URLs for all of my videos things. So even if YouTube crashes and burns on some of their indexing system, I can still keep track of all that kind of stuff. So there. Yes, we're all keeping track of work on things. I suppose I could say what I've been doing in the TIP project and what I, although any of you who follow me on Twitter will see me commenting in a variety of ways, you'll often see these long stretches where I'm not tweeting. And that's because I'm doing my work. And I'll check over every once in a while and go, oh, okay, there's 20 mentions. And I'll go in and triage and find out what I want to jump in on. It can be flat earthers like I was doing today. There can be some old flames that pop up that you get these people that I've jousted with online. I call him PVSN. He's the hyper anti-skeptic guy and a complete boring thing. He is just as vacuous as Edgar, Mr. Intelligent Design, but less charming. It's so, but he's basically a one-note Charlie thing. And it's always useful when debating these things to recognize why you're doing it. If you're in there under the supposition that you're going to try to persuade them to change their mind, find another hobby. This is not something that's very likely to do. Anybody that has an extremely Tortugan alert and make that trending. Come on, let's do this for 2019, gang. I've been trying to get one of these things there. You know, use my hashtag on there whenever you encounter anybody who, instead of calling them an idiot or liar, they're showing their inability to think about stuff and they're making some outrageous claim and they don't have sources for it and you can't get them to look at that. Just put in hashtag Tortugan alert, because that's describing what's going on in their head. Their brain is telling them, oh, no, you don't want to hear about that. No, no, no. Go back to your comfort meme. Yes, put the meme back up there. That makes you feel so much better. And you can practically see the deer in the headlight moment on certain question matters. And the goal of interactions for me is, one, to find approaches that they're uncomfortable dealing with because they can't answer them, because if they could, they wouldn't get a Tortugan alert. So the routine things, the reptile mammal transition on evolution matters. There are things that I bring up when I'm discussing religious apologetics. I try to come up with some easily remembered things like the origins or bust concept. and Pascal's Las Vegas, and some of these other things that are kind of handy in a variety of contexts. The origins or bust I use a lot because an awful lot of anti-evolutionists use that kind of an argument. And it's a way of using humor and techniques that remind you of what the issues are, and don't let people who are presuppositionists slip in presuppositions. There, an awful lot of the arguments that go on in these debates are where people are trying to use a proprietary use of terminology to where they get to deck stack everything by how they frame the issue, when in fact they're leaving stuff out. And it's the goal of the on the ball discusser to poke holes in all of that stuff. And if you're dealing with an empirical subject, which we are with evolution, discuss the data field so that you are actually trying to be educational and bring up stuff where, oh, I didn't know about that, and bring up sources if anyone asked about them. I don't deluge people with technical citations typically, unless it's relevant to where you're saying, oh, you just asked if there's a source on that. I'm happy to oblige. And then you can start delving into it and see how far they go with it. Sometimes it's a matter of where you come into the next tier up from the bottom feeders. You've got the ones who actually do think they know the data field a bit because they've copied something from an anti-evolution source, and they'll link to a paper on it. Odds are they didn't do it originally. They've simply glommed onto it from an apologetic site. And if you are familiar more with all of that material, you'll get a tighter sense of that. So, yeah, try to make Tortugan Alert trending. Everyone make a point of getting Evolution Slam Dunk if you haven't got that for your library. Jackson Weed and I are busy working on the new Rocks Are Still There book, which is going to dismantle the Answers in Genesis bunch. There's about 3 or 4 different books that they've generated over the years. And it's going to be a juicy one. We're going after flood geology and their radiometric dating arguments, and then their weird notions of genetic entropy and their mutation bits and all of the failed world of their thing. It's not about theology. We know how to deal with theology, although we will be alluding to the God issues and the historical matters there along the way, just because it's part of their worldview and you can't avoid it. You can slide around it a little bit in discussing intelligent design brand of anti-evolution, because supposedly they don't ground their things in biblical doctrine. They're just dealing with the empirical science. Well, falls apart there too. But never, don't ever think that the vast majority of anti-evolutionists are not ones who have a theological axe to grind, no matter how closely they do or do not present all of that. So we're just plowing along in here. The bilirubin material, I really put a lot of that stuff in because I want people to take a look at that one. It was really interesting stuff, and it reminded me of a lot of old stuff on the heme evolution. What you have to envisage is what you're seeing in a modern organism is the tip of the iceberg of billions of years of variation. So very few deep core systems are original. They're variations and modifications that have modified so much that you could call them new things, but they didn't come out of nowhere. And so even the Cambrian explosion, by the time you're getting down to there, by which time the ancestors of plants are knocking around, but they're not yet on the land, and the ancestors of animals are knocking around, but they're not yet on the land. They've drawn on a genetic system that goes way back. The mitochondrial endosymbiosis is just one of those, but all these little deep biochemical systems that are involving juggling ions around inside of the cell. Some of them trace back in the multicellular stage. Some of them go even farther back to very, very deep core systems in bacteria. And so the amount of work that's been done on this in the last 20, 30 years is just astonishing. And I wanted to give a little taste on that. So it's also a reminder, whenever you encounter any creationist discussion of techno-geeky stuff, where you've got them discussing a very specific issue like this bilirubin thing, and if you look down in that catchpool piece, you're not going to see a heck of a lot of technical citations. Research the term. Find out what a bilirubin is and find out, oh, that's part of a bigger cluster of stuff. And you can do a lot of this. I did. Some of the stuff was just on Wikipedia. You could start tracing around what the terms are, and then you realize this connects up with that, and that connects up with that. Well, all of those will give you a door opening because of the technical literature that's being alluded to there. And then as some of the things pop along, then you start looking up the technical issues that are being raised in the technical citations. That opens up the bigger layer on layer on layer of stuff, and you can get caught up with material fairly quickly. I had some of the connecting links already in my tip work, but I had not previously heard about this pigment issue, and so that what would seem to be just a creationist sidebar of the wonderful providence of God on a theological matter. Do they really want to go there? Do we really want to argue that the Bible, that couldn't condemn slavery and thought that all language was confused at Babel and thought the stars were made after plants, that weird account, we can still look at the fact that God was terribly concerned about putting bilirubins in bird of paradise plants? I mean, is that really the kind of argument that they're going for? I have my doubts about that one. That it's ultimately a theodicy issue that relates to, do they really mean that when they talk about what's being designed and what isn't? I use the same thing with my favorite example, which are the ALUs. That like 10% of the human genome is just ALU retrotransposons, copy, 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 copy. There's like 1,400,000 of them at last count, and growing, a couple hundred every generation. Because we're a compilation of genetic systems. And one thing you want to get familiar enough with if you're going to deal with creationists at the biological level is to have a clear sense about how much all of that long standing on the shoulders of giants biologically process has been going on. And there's no example of organisms that pop poof out of the middle of nowhere without antecedents. Whether the animal phyla in the Cambrian are making use of genetic systems that long predate that go into choanoflagellates, and there's a whole bunch of ancestral genetic systems going on that then take on new roles in the newer breed of metazoans that are coming along in the last billion years. And you'll only find that out when you start looking at the primary source technical literature and ferreting out those threads. You won't find it out even following up directly the source material in the anti-evolutionist stuff, because they don't think about it. So you would have to do that sidebar of researching things. And people can use Google Scholar for that, for a lot of source citation elements. I'm kind of pissed off at the fact that PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and Science, that used to list, when you printed up an abstract in the thing, you would get also listing the technical papers in the system that had cited it. And that was really neat. They've stopped doing that. You can't see that directly in PNAS anymore or in Science Magazine. So it's actually less useful from a scholarly point of view. But it's compensated because I've got greater internet accessibility and more things are online now. So I can Google the title of the paper or the subject core of that and get linked up, or using Google Scholar and various other ways to link up material. So there's the trick of that. Let me find out what that is. Brian has just put up a link to a YouTube here, and I have no clue what it is. I'm going to have to turn my thing off here so I don't. And it's, there we go. And I've got to, there we go. And we're getting my, I had my, what the hell? There we go. I have to turn off the volume on the other things, or I'm starting to gain feedback. Oh, how to fix this channel. I will have to then put that on a thing and get back to that. We will see what we need to do. Thank you so much. I plead totally guilty to being dull as a sack of hammers on these new technologies. I come from an ancient day before any of this was done. I've done computer programming and various things over the years. So once I understand the principle of things, then I can run with it. But when I'm diving into something that's new and I don't know the parameters and techniques and I don't have the right little tutorials on the subject, I'm really bulky about plowing in right and left on there. So thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for the link on that. And whether or not it'll do any good with me, I don't know. We'll see. Yes, Brian Stevens says easier than writing it out. Yeah, duh. Yeah, I'm sure it's a relatively easy but laborious thing because I've got an awful lot of videos now to sort out as to how I'm going to be moving them across and all of that, and how quickly I get around to doing all of that. We'll see. It's a constant juggling act of incoming information. There's a mountain of technical literature that is relevant to the TIP system, and even just keeping up with researching a particular technical paper, because the goal of my TIP project is to gradually build up a complete map of all of the primary source technical citation literature that's been done by anti-evolutionists. And that allows me to measure things that you couldn't measure before. You can literally see what topic areas get noticed or not in anti-evolutionism. And that allows you not only to see what they're leaving out, it allows you to target questions against an area that you know they can't answer because they don't know anything about it. Brian says that Andrew Knoll is a good source of tech-related solvents, especially code and Linux problems. Well, I'm afraid I'm below the learning curve on even that little aspect, so we'll keep. So we're about halfway through. Let me put up my charming shameless plug thing here. RJ goes through the laborious process of hunting up the damn screen share button. Yay! Over there, and that over there. There we go. Here I revamped to realize, yes, I do have categories of people in the field. We have our colleagues, Andrew, Hendrel, and Eric. And then we have researcher class supporters, Keith and Fino and Brad and Ralph and Meet and Palogia. Hello, Palogia. And Sur and Zeshi. These are all fairly recent. And the assistant researchers, we have Dara Wolf and Doranker and Nyanya and Staggles and Suris, who's helping me do the audio book of Paralogs, and we'll do one of Evolution Slam Dunk on that too. That'll be a tricky one to pull off. A technical literature work reformatted for the purposes of audiobook, and Torres Real. Then our friends, Eatmeal, Stephen and Marigale and Daniel and Bo and Alex and Paul. And I still throw in what I would call the legacy patrons. These were ones that helped a bit. At some time they did for a while, they moved on, or they did single donations, and I'm still extremely thankful to Jen and John and Mona and Son and Everett. They help me, or at least theoretically will eventually if my formatting gets changed out. And then we've got then we'll put up our, now on a separate page, the shameless plug section. There's the WordPress.com. That's my website. I've also got a www.tortucan.com that is kind of a training wheel thing that where we were testing out how we needed to do these as HTML documents. And there's a lot I need to figure out to get it properly structured, and also to make the main website smartphone handy, which means we got to weave off of the PDF things, and I still haven't gotten all my skill set organized on that. So I plead extenuating ignorance so far on that. There is the website for the Patreon account where you can contact that. I've also put that in the descriptions, and then also the GoFundMe.com DCGo thing, where you can help that way. You can do individual things of any value whatsoever. Buy me the equivalent of a cup of coffee, $5. That's perfectly fine. Or do it as a continuing thing, which you can do standard bits like $5 a month. That's $60 a year. I'm sounding like the KPBS, the Public Broadcasting Pledge Weeks here, but that's how it works. And I'm not monetized. I don't have advertisements on the videos. I want to avoid that like the plague. And so if I can have things where we are not beholden to anything, or for that matter, where some people, I've seen ads come up on videos from free thinkers and that, and it's stuff that's actually not in the same political or cultural realm, but it's an advertisement for something that they have to get stuck with. I want to avoid that at all costs. So there's my shameless plug thing. And close that down. I have to minimize the number of windows and things that I have so that there will not deal with the funding games. Since if Sidestrike is still in the room, then remember I did put you dun 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 as a tag in those Hercules flat earthers that I've been going after. I think he's possibly just a troll. It wouldn't surprise me at all. There's been very little going on, although he did cite some Eric Dubé video at one point, which I thought would interest you, Cy, because Eric Dubé and Jaron are two of the Mount Olympus nutballs in the flat Earth universe, and the fact that this little schlub was bringing Dubé onto the field, who was a anti-Semitic nut, and who cribbed one of his little books that I think you could still get it online. Is all essentially cribbed from Harun Yahya postings. So what this guy believes and what frame he comes from and who he was wanting to parasitize from, it's hard to tell. You get that when you're looking at a flat earther, you're looking at the very bottom dregs of bad source methodology, because in principle, not only this one Hercules fellow was insisting that no one takes NASA seriously. No, just about everyone does. It's just weird wackaloons who don't take NASA seriously. And if you gathered all the wackaloons together, I don't think you could actually even fill a football stadium on the planet. That you could get a modest convention hall, perhaps, but not necessarily a giant soccer stadium. But the same failures that you're seeing in creationism or anti-vaxxers or any belief system that believes something that isn't true are showing up just on steroids with flat earthers. Over-reliance on secondary sources, for all practical purposes, is nothing but secondary sources. You have these videos almost exclusively these days. For those of you who want to hit your head with a ball peen hammer, metaphorically, research 19th century flat earth. Again, Martin Gardner's Fads and Fallacies book went into some of this stuff, and there's a few analysts on it. They didn't have the internet. They had to do flat earth the old-fashioned way, which was to make little pamphlets that they would be handing out and having little meetings, and they were usually subsets of very conservative Christians who didn't like the 19th century. And so they would be geocentric as well as flat earth. And you tend to find that even among modern flat earthers. They tend to be hyper-religious, and they come from a very narrow biblical frame. But it's not always easy to ferret that out. It's like nailing Jello to a wall to discuss things with most of these, as their little brain bounces from one Tortugan rut to another. It's a fascinating process. So methodologically, it can be really quite interesting. And if you do actually research the other end of it, which is how you measure things like how big stars are and how far they are away and what they're made of, and the planets and the history of how we developed modern cosmology, how we got rid of geocentrism, and why it was just a non-starter for Eratosthenes, who was around 2,500 years ago. That's about 1,000 years between that and the time when the Christian church was absolutely committed now to not flat earth. And the point where flat earthers, like I think fellow Cosmos Indeplustes, I think is one of the hangers on, who was still pushing for a flat earth in the, I think, 5th century or 4th century, sometime around in there, just as they were becoming a legalized thing. So the Aristotelian worldview was the standard model of its time, and it was spherical earth, but geocentric. And they stayed stuck with that for a very, very long time. I'm still looking over in here. Brian says that someone is a Sidestrike, good addition to the Sunday Science team if he's willing. Tell him. So there's discussions going on there. Puffalophagus asks, I love how they always say NASA are liars, but don't question the Russians at all. You know, the folks that did most everything first in storage. Yeah, the rampant globalist paranoia and accusation of fraud that flat earthers have to go through is something way beyond anything that you would even see in young earth creationism. And it's hilarious to see. And I know Sidestrike had a big humor fest when we saw a Kent Hovind video that was critical of flat Earth. And we're going, for the first time and only time in our life, we're actually kind of agreeing with Kent Hovind, but it's purely accidental because most young Earth creationists are nowhere near flat Earth belief. And in fact, most of them aren't geocentrists. And yet you do have that geocentrist camp that's bigger than the flat Earth bunch. And geocentrics pop up in Ellwanger, that was in the creation science movement in the 1980s, although I think he's still around, but he's not quite so active. And Gerardus Boo, a lot of computer programmers. They tend to be technical engineering field types, and incredibly annoying and unpersuadable. I can't think of many of the core flat earthers who ever change their mind. And that's true of core creationists and core ideologues of most types. They stay with that mythology to their dying day. You find it's easier if you were raised in a belief system and you're not a Tortugan to give up on it over time. And you find that in creationism generally, but it seems less so as you go up. There's almost like a Lorentz contraction equation applying to woo, that the weirder and more improbably preposterous the argument, the less likely it is that a believer will ever change their mind on it, because they have to have a certain kind of mindset to have swallowed it to begin with. And flat Earth is in that category. There's really no other thing. It gets Neil deGrasse Tyson going, what? In this day and age. But when you look at it from a methods direction, you can see that overlap. So I suppose it's fun to have devout young Earth creationists, non-geocentrist, non-flat earthers, to see them tackle flat Earth. Jason Lyle, I think, has done some postings on it. You can find that at AIG, and it's intriguing to watch how suddenly they turn into provisional methodological naturalists, and let's pay attention to all the evidence set, plus theological. To some extent, it's a theological balance where they're disputing over passages in Isaiah or others about the circle of the earth and all that. Pavlovicus there, for friggin' frog snacks, we confirm the existence of the Van Allen belts by intercepting data from the first Russian satellites. Yeah, there's a massive amount of information. I remember, and any of us old farts were around when the space age began. Thank you very much. When I was 5 years old when Sputnik went off, and so I was there. In fact, the new educational system that came in, and it's the reason why modern young Earth creationism spurred up, is because they were suddenly putting evolution back in the schools, or in the schools in the first place, to keep us up to speed with the science because of the threat from the Russians. And so the new math curriculum and the new science curriculum that was coming in, I was part of that. That was just kicking in the early 1960s. Along with polio vaccines and all these other things. So I'm a living testament to why anti-vaxxerism is stupid and why flat earthers or creationism is a weird sidebar issue. And you'd have to believe that every astronaut, every cosmonaut, every astronaut from other countries, they're from India, Japan, they're all over the place now, who have been into space. It's still a select group, but thanks to Elon Musk and Virgin Air, there's only a matter of time before we have tourism in space. And then there's not going to be a few hundred people that have been into space. There's going to be thousands and tens of thousands at a lunar base, and people going to be tourists on Mars. And that's going to be harder and harder to deal with. So it's going to be fun to try to see how a flat earther will maintain flat Earth when somebody can say, just buy a ticket on the suborbital and take a trip up to the space station, you nincompoop. And it'll be like that. But then again, we already have that phenomenon with the ice wall. I keep on asking the flat earther, well, have you been to the ice wall? And they'll just repeat tropes. Well, no, it's forbidden. Well, get a boat and find out if it's forbidden. Test it out. Well, that would involve money. And it was more expensive than buying a laser pointer or a P900 camera. And that would involve too much effort on that. Oh, yeah, Brian, yes, yeah, the Russian, you're not expecting me to pronounce Russian here. Prostoyashi Sputnik 2 was first to carry life out too. I think wasn't that Laika the dog The poor little dog, they're going in the pictures. You're going, wow. And I think they set up some chimpanzees and all of that. We forget how totally unprepared everybody was for going into space. Nobody knew by direct experience what it was going to be like. Were you going to be fried by weird radiation? Were you going to be able, was your metabolism going to go berserk when you were up into space? We now know, in fact, that you got to make sure you exercise, because without gravity cues, your blood doesn't go into the right spots, and you shrink a bit or extend, something like the bones change height and all that, and you get relatively weak when you get back into a gravitational field. So there's a whole bunch of things they have to pay attention to. But that was not as weirdly serious as what everyone was thinking back in the 1950s. And even as it was, I mentioned a little bit of it in the tip work that everyone should have downloaded so they can read this stuff. I think it was in the first chapter of the old tip work where I discussed the lunar dust myth that you still, once in a while, will see a young Earth creationist bring up. For those of you too young to remember this, the lunar dust myth is the idea that the scientists thought there would be tens of meters of lunar dust on the moon if it were billions of years old. And when they landed, they discovered just a tiny, thin little layer. Ha ha! That proves that the moon is in fact young. Well, it turns out they were trying to guesstimate how much meteoric dust there is in the solar system. And the early estimates they drew on was from Mauna Loa, I think, because it was very, very clean air up on the mountain. And it turns out that dust is actually getting concentrated there. So it was way higher than what they did when they actually went up into space. And they set up little detectors in the Gemini missions, if memory serves me, to test this stuff out. And it turned out, whoa, there's way less meteoric dust in space than they thought. And that lowered the estimates to where I think, Ernest Gold, the geologist and cosmologist, he was about one of the few who was crossing his fingers in terror when the Apollo missions went on, that he thought there was going to be a big pile of lunar dust there. But everyone else, based on these newer data, were thinking, yeah, no, it's going to be only about yay big. It's not going to be a big deal. And that turned out to be the case. So this was an idea that was really dumb to begin with, as I went through how they were just cherry picking their data, the creationists were. And so it's one of those so bad that regular creationists recommend not using it. And that means if you find anybody today who still repeats the lunar dust myth, oh, they don't read their creationism. They're just relying on old material from the 60s and 70s, and they never bother to check. We got here on about bodies getting weaker, but the telomeres get longer. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. It could very well be. There's a whole interesting field of space biology. It's one of the reasons why they take things up into space that are alive. Plants, do they find out, do they germinate the same way when they don't have a gravitational field? You take bugs up, although we know from vermin that the little bugs are really good at going up on their own. You never actually see spiders and stuff on board the Millennium Falcon in science fiction stories. But if there's one thing we can be probably certain of, is little itty bitty critters are going to find their way up into any space environment. And who knows what will happen in those circumstances. There's some upcoming Nova special this week. In fact, I think it's already happening. I think I got it on record about the mission to Pluto. There's a new Nova special for the year. And then, of course, we're all going to be looking for the Frosty the Snowman Ultima Thule asteroid or planetesimal, whatever you want to call it, in there, that they're not entirely certain whether or not they're two other separate bodies that have just kissed together really recently. They're not actually merged yet because they're relatively small mass and relatively new. So we'll find out. And the science will get done, and the flat earthers will ignore it. And all the creationists will cherry pick what they will to try to prove that it was all recent, so that none of these things can be very old. And meanwhile, the science will move on. So there we go. So in those in the audience, you got any questions for me here? Normally, I would be riffing off of any guests that I had in the audience. I will do a plug for the 16th, 2 weeks from now, when we'll have Matt Herron Volvox biologist who has got a brand new paper. I'll be having a link on that on multicellular issues and stuff, and we should have a lot of fun. He's jousted a little bit with anti-evolutionists, and so there'll be lots of topics. Hopefully we'll have that. He was a guest on Jackson Wheat's show, and it was quite nice, and he agreed to come on the show, and had to delay until January. So cross fingers, he'll be on the 16th. There we go. Hello, Look a Pig, and Terry Davis. Terry Davis says, hi, everyone, missing out on all the fun. Well, to the extent that I do fun, I do, I'll just reprise for Terry that I put a link up to a flat earther that I debated during the Christmas holiday. Yay! He was not Elf on the Shelf bright. And then I put up linkages, of course, to some of the material from the Rupe and Sanford book that I've been analyzing. And then the big bulk of them are a mother load of stuff on the evolution of the hemoglobin system and the heme pathway and its relations to the things that lead to these little bilirubin animals pigments that turn out to have occurred independently in the bird of paradise. And a creationist was making a big deal, gee whiz, about that. And so it was one that I had encountered a couple of weeks ago. And as I encounter these new examples of research, when they look particularly juicy and the public, the full text is available, freebie, then I'll put them as things to put in the upcoming evolution hour. So I'll always have some little lagniappe to deal with on there. And SciStrike's still in there. You could come in. I gave you a link, I think, to reprise things and talk about what. Yeah, matter of fact, that's a fine one. A SciStrike text. I think I put the link in there for you to the live chat. Maybe we could talk about, to fill out the tail end of the show, the issue of what woo fighting will be for the coming year of 2019. What potential things we will still have flat earthers to deal with. We still may very well have anti-vaxxers to contend with. Creationism has been on kind of a slow, low burner. The Trump administration hasn't attempted, as far as I can tell, to make an issue out of it. Betsy DeVos apparently hasn't. She's been busy getting rid of protections for handicapped people and sexual harassment stuff and all those things that an education secretary really should probably have just let go and let keep with it. So that end of things is likely to occur. We do know, like, fetal tissue research they're trying to curtail that at the National Institute for Health, and Tony Perkins, the young Earth creationist, is just crowing about that just this week. So those woo issues do in fact have impact. We can presume there will be a change in things because of the new Democratic Congress. I guess Nancy Pelosi has arranged to set up a new committee that's going to be dealing with how we can deal with climate change. And it's not a committee that's going to thrash over the evidence for climate change. Sorry, that boat has sailed. We've already got that. So now they're going to be working on what do we do about it. And we do know that lots of states, even some that voted red for Trump, are still doing things. Kansas and other places are little busy beavers on environmental things because it's affecting them now. They're actually affecting it now. Puffalovica says, if you asked if I've seen the conversation Robert Reich had with the departing Republican senator on how they plan to hand the POTUS over to Pence. No, I haven't heard that. I've always been leery as a result of the fact that if you just impeach Trump, you're going to get President Pence. And Pence is a true believer. He believes pretty much the same culture camp agenda that Trump has been pushing from the sidelines. And that would just continue. So all the material on religious persecution and protecting the minority rights of the majority of Christians, all of this special privilege stuff that they want to deal with, their ideological lens where they will be very concerned, and rightly so, for persecuted Christians around the world. Jay Sekulow goes ballistic over it all the time. But what the problem is they're never concerned about non-Christians being persecuted. And so there's a lopsidedness to the matter that is potentially troubling. Theoretically, if Pence, however, got dragged in because of some of these scandals and got impeached at the same time, then technically speaking, Nancy Pelosi would become president because she's third in line of succession. It's Speaker of the House. So it wouldn't be President Ryan. He's gone. It would be Nancy Pelosi, and you would have positive conniption fits of angst in the land of Dinesh D'Souza and Ann Coulter, and there would be wailing and gnashing of teeth at the Republican National Committee. But the odds of that happening are extremely remote. And but anyway, it's going to be a fun 2019. We get to see what's going on with trade issues and climate issues, because we're now really starting to bite into the direct effects of climate warming, of increasing storms, where any state that lives on the Gulf Coast and on the East Coast is just going to have to be getting increasingly used to serious storm surge flooding and mega storms that are only Category 3, but they rain and rain and rain and rain and rain and rain, and it clogs everything up, and you're washing the houses away. And so everybody's insurance rates are going to be going up, because they're going to have to be getting brand new cars, and they're going to have mildew damage in their houses, and they're going to have to be rebuilding or put on stilts. And it's a interesting world we live in now, and it's going to be harder and harder for people to ignore that. Trump will continue to ignore it because he lives in his little bubble. He's always lived in a bubble, and he'll never pay any attention to anything. And so the states and local municipalities are just going to do it themselves. So a lot of states are just going to be abiding by the Paris Accords, regardless of what the president says. Puffaluffagus says, Sidestrike says, it's Mueller time. Yeah, we're going to be getting some things. Puffaluffagus says, the grand scheme is to turn the wall between church and state into a funnel from church to state policy. Well, that's been the goal of I use the word Coulter-Kempfer, and I'll put that in there. People should use it more because I think it's handy, and it makes it instantly distinguished. Okay, come on. I hate it when I think I'm typing in a window and then I'm not. And then I have to realize nothing happened. I use that term. It's Otto von Bismarck's term for his battle with the Catholic Church over parochial education back in the 19th century, 1860s and so 70s. And it's a handy term. It means culture struggle. If you think of Mein Kampf from Hitler, that's my struggle. And the fact that there's a culture struggle has been the leitmotif. I could use culture war, but I like having the Kulturkampf term. It gets people to think about it, and they go, where did you get that from? Well, let's talk about the history of Bismarck. And so you can kind of slip some history in on the side, and it just annoys people to use that. So I try to do that whenever possible. But anyway, so when I describe anti-evolutionists as Kulturkampf conservative Christians, by and large, or religionists, that covers the field. It's a suite of behavior, and that block, the Tony Perkins set, the James Dobson, the focus on the family, and the conservative ACLJ, that Jay Sekulow, who is a lawyer to the president now, and they've been their hobby horses are typically support for Israel because the end times are coming, and anti-abortion and anti-gender equality, and make sure marriage is only for a man and a woman. All of those, they've already lost on quite a few of those, but they've found their in, and that's why too many evangelicals have continued to support the president, even though he's a slime bucket, and they even recognize that he's a slime bucket. But he's the slime bucket that is doing God's work in reinforcing things, and in particular, putting conservative Federalist Society judges on not merely the Supreme Court, but a slew of them on the state courts. And Mitch McConnell basically put all these court appointments on the fast track, and has gotten most of them all through. Occasional crash and burns from some of the more egregious ones, and many of them may be perfectly competent people and will be okay in the long run. Just because somebody has gotten endorsed by the conservative bunch doesn't mean they will be incompetent judges. But some of them will have an agenda involved, and you can keep an eye out for rulings that get pesky in the coming years, and how many of them are from Trump judges. So they feel that they've got their big leg in a way that they haven't really in previous years. Even the Bush administration and the earlier Bush administration before that had a more middle of the road approach to these things. They would put conservatives in, but not somebody that was on the hyper approved, hyper conservative list. And that's changed. So that gives you some of the political skivvy of what's going on in there. Brian Stevens said, we need to start an RJ colloquial dictionary. Yeah. Well, I'm a Coulter Camp, and of course we got Tortugan alert, and then my memory joggers that I have, Origins or Bust, and the Bermuda Triangle Defense, and Skinner-Johnson Gambit, and all of these things that I use in the TIP project to pigeonhole conceptual problems that I do. Origins or Bust I use a lot. Because that's the almost default mode among anti-evolutionists, is to go after, well, where did life come from? Where did the universe come from? Where did matter come from? Well, the short answer is we don't know. But it doesn't make the reptile-mammal transition go away, and it doesn't make the ALUs in your genome go away, and it doesn't make the fact that we have pseudogenes and retrotransposons and tooth enamel genes in mammals, toothless mammals, and all of that stuff. All of that's still there, and it doesn't make the Book of Genesis any less twaddly. It doesn't make the slavery rules in Exodus go away. It doesn't make all the genocide issues that go on with Kings and Chronicles and Joshua scamper into the night. None of that changes. Or the Mahabharata over in the Hindu scriptures or any of that stuff. All that's just as twaddly too. And none of that changes based on Origins or Bust. So by recognizing it as a category that you can therefore avoid the pitfalls of it. Origins or Bust is an area that anti-evolutionists love bringing up, and religionists do, and it's a quagmire that if you don't know an awful lot about the cutting edge, you can't just say, well, we've solved the origin of life. No, we haven't. We have lots of clues on it now, and we know much more than we did before, but it's still not a done deal. And to pretend that it is something that just plays into the dogma that the evolutionist is pushing their data envelope outside of things. So go with the reptile-mammal transition instead. Yes, Brian Stevens, I love fiddly bits almost as much as wobbly. And let's not forget timey-wimey things. I am a great believer in timey-wimey stuff too. Yes, I watch my Doctor Who. Fiddly bits, yeah, that actually, the person I remember who came up with that phrase or used it a lot was James Burke from the Connections series. And if you do not know who James Burke Connections is, Google him. I think you can probably see most of the things on YouTube now these days, and make use of that. So we're past the hour on here. Does anyone have any last minute favorite RJ phrase? Fiddly bits. Yeah, I like that. It's a nice handy way of referring to what you would be talking about, green eye shade, if you don't know what green eye shade allusions to. And it's a fun Brit thing. Gobsmacked, I love that word too. Manky, that's another neat Brit word that I've seen used a bit. So watch BBC programs and TV shows, and you can get all this slang that we can bring in that puts in to make us an international polyglot. Terry, please check out James Burke and the Connections series. He did it back in the 1970s. He did a book of it. There's Connections and Connections 1 and 2, and I think almost all of them are out on video. It's slow paced by modern standards, and it was filmed and rudimentary, didn't have fancy special effects and stuff. But that was the most influential series I've ever seen ever for me. Way more than Connections, than Carl Sagan's Cosmos series. Connections was exhilarating. It changed how I thought about the interplay between economics and scientific development and individual personality foibles and the happenstances and contingencies of accident, to where you can't anticipate the future technologically because you can't know what's going to lead to what. And Connections clarified that a lot. So yeah, I cannot possibly recommend it too highly. It's an absolutely delicious program, and it's also funny. His motto was, and he's still around. He's I think quite elderly now. He doesn't do nearly as much educating stuff now because he's my age and beyond. But the way he would get your attention, and this was pretty racy at the time for the BBC, that he would be talking about the Middle Ages, and there he would be showing this medieval fair, and there was a naked woman, bare-breasted, in a bucket getting a bath. And then suddenly he veers into the frame. Now that we have your attention, So yeah, James Burke is the science teacher you always wish you had. He's wonderfully. The motto of his is that anything that can be understood can be explained, and it's the job of the educator to explain it in such a way that you retain it. You can understand relativity theory and evolution and everything, industrial chemistry, doesn't matter. It can be explained in a way where you can get a grip on it. I remember that one of the earliest videos that he did in the 80s was after the warming, where he was talking about the issues that would be facing the 21st century due to climate change. And he was always on the ball with material way ahead of an awful lot of other people. So yeah, James Burke. Yeah, Seward Tape says, James Burke Connections has a 63 video playlist on YouTube. Thanks for the reference. Yes, bearing in mind that we have a faster pacing and it's not as glitzy as you would find in a modern video, but it's informative and you will learn about some amazing things. I only discovered about the mini industrial revolution that took place in Czechoslovakia in the 1200s with their silver industry that worked out things that led to pumping mechanisms that ultimately led to things that produced the printing press and metallurgy. And it's just astonishing the number of connections that happen. You'll find out why we have computers, because women wore linen underwear back in the Middle Ages. You'll find all sorts of weird connections that you would never think linked up to stuff. That we don't build science and technology out of a vacuum. The Captain Nemo super genius that sits in the room and figures everything out on their own. No, that isn't how science and technology works. And that was, I think, the limit, the problem that Carl Sagan had in this area. I think deGrasse Tyson probably has a better grip on this than Sagan did, to where he, the book that he just came out with, talking about the role that the space race and the warfare battle between us and the Soviet Union had technological spin-off and things that came about that you wouldn't have expected otherwise. Well, Sagan didn't really get a grip on that. He didn't realize the role that economics plays in the development of technology and how greed and innovation can come about because of that. And in the course of the Connection series, you'll find out about how our food system developed from the fact that Napoleon needed to can stuff. You needed militaries that could carry food with them more reliably. So all of the things that we figured out about a bottle and can stuff was stemming in the 19th century. The communication technology that was being developed, the need to find new ways to make artificial tar and crap for boats when they were running out of trees to burn for stuff, and coal tar, and the coal tar technology that developed into coal, which developed into the steam engine, which developed into the Industrial Revolution, which gave us eventually automobiles and air pollution. Lots and lots of things are going on. And it's just an incredible delight. And if you don't want to do the video approach, you can buy the books directly. After you bought Evolution, slam dunk. So we've slid past the hour on that. Any other final questions in here after we mentioned all of that? Bollocks. Oh, Beach mentions bollocks. That's another good word. Yes, that's all. That's and the one that I got from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That's a pile of dingoes' kidneys. It's not worth a pile of dingoes' kidneys. I think that's sublimely profound, and I tend to use that a lot as well. So let's all keep our Brit snarky humor words in thing, and let's make hashtag Tortugan Alert trending on Twitter. Damn it, use it. So I will be shutting down and getting my dinner, which I haven't had yet, and proceeding accordingly and getting back to my tip work. I suppose I should hit enter on that. And thank you all, and see you next week and the weeks beyond. And let's make 2019 better than 2018, because who wants to live through that again? Okay, we will be stopping the broadcast.